In rabbinical school, as part of our training, many of us complete a unit of what is called clinical pastoral education, or CPE. We spend either a semester or a summer interning at a hospital. I happen to work at Cedar Sinai. No, I did not visit any celebrities. Rabbi Jeremy Simons, however, may have. He can't talk to you about it, though, because HIPAA. However, we work under a specially trained supervisor to learn the art of spiritual care. Much of our training is what you would imagine, getting on-the-job training in a throw-you-in-the-deep-end of the pool kind of way, by visiting patients, supporting families, and caring for staff. However, some of the most important work happens in the classroom with your cohort, a group of learners from a variety of religious traditions. And while we spent many a study session learning about the clinical side of spiritual care, which I find ironic, we also spent an inordinate amount of time processing our own experiences from our own histories. What interactions with a patient triggered us? What from our past may have been brought to the surface with a particular patient? Often it was hard to put our finger on what exactly it was about someone that may have stirred up feelings of discomfort or even comfort, of distance or of closeness, and so on. So in order to help us unpack our experiences, our supervisor assigned us the task of creating a genogram. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have made a genogram. I know there are some therapists in the audience who may be familiar. But a genogram is similar to a family tree, but it's so much more. For each individual you put down, you include not only their date of birth and, if applicable, their date of death, but you also include more data. For instance, you record health issues, so you can kind of see what health issues flow through your family history. But most importantly to our CPE training, you also identify patterns in relationships between family members. It gets very personal. So that doesn't mean that it doesn't matter if they're healthy relationships or dysfunctional. You indicate who in your family has a close relationship with each other, who has a conflicted relationship, who has no relationship, who has a fused relationship, and so on. The idea is to, as clinically and non-judgmental as possibly, identify patterns in your family to reflect on which ones you'd like to continue and which ones you might want to put an end to. You can imagine this was a fascinating, aka terrifying exercise as I called various family members to ask for a different kind of family history than we normally talked about. What are the relationships in our family history that we may not talk about anymore? I personally had my own relationship with each family member I called, but I didn't actually know a lot about how they related to one another. So the reason this exercise of creating a genogram was on my mind this week was not because I wanted to share my genogram with you, but because as I read the Torah portion from this week, Vayeshev, the first of 4 portions that detail the story of Joseph, my first thought was, I wonder what Joseph's genogram would look like. Before we get more into that question, I want to just review the portion a tiny bit. And thanks to the incredible Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, this Bible story is one that is familiar to most of you probably, and most people outside of this room as well. The infamous coat served as the symbol to all 12 of Joseph's siblings, he had a sister, that he was their father Jacob's favorite child. In order to keep his position secure as the favorite, as the most beloved offspring, Joseph would often bring malicious reports about his brothers to his father. Understandably, this would lead to what I would like to call the most extreme levels of sibling rivalry. However, the Torah doesn't make it that so simple because Cain and Abel are a pretty good contender, as well as Jacob and Esau himself. So we have a lot of complex sibling relationships already. Pretty stiff competition in the siblings who hate each other the most category in the Torah. But so Joseph continues stoking the jealousy flame by sharing 2 dreams with his brother, in which Joseph is the leader and the brothers all bow to him. While it turns out that these dreams do come to fruition, it doesn't set Joseph up to be the most likable character. I never was a huge fan of Joseph. He comes off as prideful and selfish and even mean-spirited, even though we know he's a teenager in this week's portion. We can almost sympathize with the brothers' desire to get rid of him when they're talking about, what should we do with him? Kill him, throw him in a pit, sell him to slavery. Part of us is like, I get it. Even if we're actually ashamed that they followed through on this fantasy. But how did this family get to this point? Although I have yet to create an official genogram for our biblical patriarchs and matriarchs, but I came really close to doing it today, and then I realized I had a lot of other things to do. Let's think of what we know about the family relationship patterns. If we begin with Abraham, right off the bat, we find complicated relationships between husband and wife, between Abraham and Sarah, between wife and maidservant, Sarah and Hagar, father and sons, Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac. The trend continues with Abraham and Sarah's son Isaac and his wife Rebekah, with how they raised their twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Isaac favoring Esau while Rebekah favored Jacob. And Jacob was raised with this awareness that he was his mother's favorite and that his brother was his father's favorite. He knew it so much that he knew he had to dress up as his brother to steal the blessing. He was conscious. He had that growing up knowing that he was not his father's favorite child. This favoritism led to Jacob having to flee his home in order to save his life so his brother Esau would not kill him when he stole his birthright. And so when it comes time for Jacob to create a family of his own, what does he do? Surely he has learned the lessons of the generations before him. Alas, not only do we see him repeating the actions of his grandfather by having a favorite wife among his four, but we also see him make the choice, despite knowing the consequences, of raising his children the same way he was raised. Each child knowing where they stood in their father's eyes, everyone under Joseph. Of Jacob's 13 children mentioned in the Torah, we are told, and I quote, Israel, also Jacob's another name for Jacob, loved Joseph better than his other sons. Doesn't mention the daughter. Given Jacob's family history, can we really be surprised that his favoritism and tendency to stir up competition among his children happens? He's simply repeating the relationship structure of at least 2 previous generations within his family. We don't know enough about the generations before Abraham. I share all of this because it helped me to see Joseph in a whole new light. Joseph started out by mimicking some of his father's least flattering characteristics early on in his life. He took advantage of his preferred status and rubbed it in his brothers' faces. However, once he becomes separated from his family, something happens to Joseph along the way. Maybe it was when he was a servant in Potiphar's house, or perhaps when he was in an Egyptian prison, but he managed, in a way I can't quite fathom, not to become resentful of his brothers. When, at the end of this portion, Joseph interprets a dream to a fellow inmate, the former chief cupbearer in the palace, the only thing Joseph mentions about his journey to that prison is that he is innocent and he wants the cupbearer to make sure Pharaoh knows. He doesn't go into details. He doesn't go into, I have the worst brothers in the world. Can you believe they left me for dead and I was sold into slavery? He doesn't say any of that. He just says, I'm innocent. Let me be free. Unlike his father Jacob, who, as we saw in last week's Torah portion, when he was given the opportunity to reestablish a relationship with Esau, the brother he tricked, he actively chooses not to. In fact, he even lies to Esau, saying, oh yeah, brother, we'll meet up, we'll be together again. And then he takes his family a whole different direction, making sure he will never encounter Esau again. Joseph, we'll see next week, is a different example. He is able to reunite the family, albeit after getting a little bit even. He still makes it so his whole family, all of his brothers and his sister and his father, can come back together. Over the years, the brothers too have regretted their actions, saying, we had another brother, when they don't realize they're speaking with Joseph, and they sought reconciliation. So careful not to repeat the mistakes within his family, even on Jacob's deathbed, Joseph tries to avoid favoritism being shown for his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Per Jacob's request, Joseph brings his son to receive their grandfather's blessing. Jacob immediately went to put his right hand, the hand reserved for blessing the older child, on Joseph's younger son. Joseph protests, saying, not that way, father. This is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But Jacob refused, sticking to his old pattern, saying, I know, my son, I know. He too shall become great. He will become a people, but his younger brother will be greater than him, and his seed shall be a multitude of nations. And so he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh, which, just for a fun fact, when we bless our children on Friday night, that is why you say, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim is the younger son, but it's because of Jacob's actions, which Joseph did not want it to be that way. Perhaps this family history is why Joseph's narrative is actually introduced with the words, Ela toldot Yaakov. The sentence will say in the Torah, these are the generations of Jacob. And then it says, Joseph was 17 years old. So in introducing the Joseph story, it starts by saying, these are the generations, these are the patterns that Joseph has inherited from his father, Jacob. Because whether we like it or not, our family histories paint the backdrop of who we are. For many years, Joseph continued the script set forth by his family for generations. It wasn't until he realized, once he was separated from them, that he could change the pattern that he did. I want us to end by inviting us for just a moment to focus on the opening words of this week's Torah portion, Vayeshev Yaakov, and Jacob settled. And while I will admit, especially with another rabbi in the audience, that it doesn't work quite this well with the Hebrew, if we play with the meaning of the English word, I think it can inform our understanding of the Joseph narrative and of Jacob as well. Given the context clues of the Hebrew and how the word Vayeshev is used other places in the Torah, it is understood to establish residence. So it's really Jacob settled in the land of Canaan, so he's living there. However, the word settled has a different meaning in English. And so to me, I now understand it as saying, Jacob settled for repeating his family history. He didn't have to. He could have chosen to make it different. He could have chosen the family that he raised to have a different story. Jacob reminds us what can happen to relationships when we don't take the time to nurture them, when we don't think about the words we say or the actions we make to those we love. Rather, it's Joseph who teaches us that we can take the narrative into our own hand, forging a new path forward, not just for ourselves, but hopefully for generations to come. We don't have to settle for life as it is. Like Joseph, we can bring light and love to this world, especially where it has been lacking, and especially to those we love the most in our lives. Shabbat shalom.